If you've ever walked past a restaurant with a help wanted sign in the window and wondered about the actual hard data behind it, well, you're in exactly the right place. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking some pretty dense SASB accounting protocols and, frankly, translating them into a clear, tactical guide you can actually use. We're zeroing in on the restaurant industry and looking at exactly how we should be measuring the human engine of those operations. Because look, whether you're an HR pro, an ops manager, or an investor, you already know labor data is basically everything. So let's figure out how to measure it right and measure it consistently together.
Here is a quick look at our agenda for today. First, we'll cover the restaurant workforce engine. Second, tracking employee turnover rates. Third, calculating average hourly wages. Fourth, measuring minimum wage staff. And finally, we'll wrap up with the real value of labor data. Let's get right into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the restaurant workforce engine, a notoriously labor-intensive industry.
Now, our source material highlights a massive complexity right out of the gate. The restaurant industry is just incredibly labor-intensive. It's often the crucial entry point for young workers just getting their feet wet, and it's a major employer for migrant workers, too. It relies so heavily on hourly, part-time, or seasonal staff. And to add a whole other layer to the puzzle, franchise models mean your workers might actually be employed by a third party. When you've got a workforce spread across the map, maybe managed by a dozen different franchisees, trying to ensure consistent labor standards and reporting, yeah, that's a real challenge.
But that's exactly where the SASB standards for labor practices come into play, specifically metrics FB RN 310A.1 and 310A.2. These are pretty much the gold standard for sustainability and operational accounting in this space. So what we're going to do right now is break down exactly how to calculate these top metrics, step by step.
Which brings us to Section 2, tracking employee turnover rates and measuring workforce retention.
Okay, before we even think about touching a calculator, we need to know exactly who we are excluding here. This is absolutely crucial to prevent reporting errors. You only want to measure the turnover of the folks actually working on site in the restaurants you directly operate. So for this specific turnover metric, you've got to leave out your corporate staff, your executive team, and this is a big one, any franchise locations. We are looking strictly at entity-owned restaurant employees here. Make sense?
Right, so you can't just lump everyone who leaves into one giant bucket. The real key here is cleanly splitting your data into two very different camps, voluntary and involuntary departures. Voluntary turnover is exactly what it sounds like, separations initiated by the employee. Think resignations or retirements. Involuntary turnover, on the other hand, is initiated by the business entity. That means dismissals, downsizing, redundancies, or just non-renewal of a contract. All right, let's get into the math. To calculate your voluntary turnover rate as a percentage, it's pretty straightforward. Step 1, count up those voluntary employee-initiated separations. Step 2, find your baseline average number of workers for that same time period. And step 3, simply divide those separations by your average workforce. Boom, there's your voluntary turnover rate.
And guess what? The exact same mathematical logic applies to your involuntary turnover rate. You're going to use that same average workforce number for your denominator. But this time around, your numerator is the count of entity-initiated separations. So those dismissals and redundancies. It is a clean, totally standardized way to see exactly why people are walking out the doors of your entity-owned locations.
Moving right along to Section 3, calculating average hourly wages and standardizing that pay data by region.
Now, this is interesting. The scope here actually shifts a bit compared to our turnover metric. For wages, you're casting a much wider net. You are specifically looking at non-manager employees, sure, but this time you absolutely must include both your entity-owned locations and your franchise locations. Just remember, exactly like before, your corporate employees are strictly excluded from this dataset.
The protocol gets super specific on the math here, and trust me, these details really matter. Step 1. Sum up the total wages paid for your reporting period. You must include tips in this number, but, and this is a big but, you absolutely have to exclude overtime pay. Step 2, sum up the hours worked, but again, exclude overtime hours. We only want regular hours here. Finally, step 3, divide those total regular wages by the total regular hours. Doing this gives you a true standardized average hourly wage that isn't distorted by, say, a crazy holiday rush of overtime. Okay, Section 4, measuring minimum wage staff and tracking your base earners. To figure out this percentage, your first step is to identify everyone making exactly at, and I mean exactly, not a penny above, the legally mandated minimum wage for that jurisdiction. Oh, and you have to calculate this strictly before any tips are factored in. Once you've got that group, just divide that number by your total amount of regional restaurant employees.
But wait, this actually brings up a genuinely fascinating structural question, especially for you global operators out there. If you're reporting on a massive multinational scale, how on earth do you report this specific metric if a particular jurisdiction doesn't even have a legally mandated minimum wage?
Well, the SASB standards actually offer a really elegant workaround for this. In those regions without a legal minimum wage, you simply benchmark using the 10th percentile hourly wage of all wage earners in that specific jurisdiction. You basically just treat that 10th percentile figure as your functional minimum wage for the calculation. It's brilliant, really, because it ensures your global reporting stays completely intact and comparable, no matter where in the world your restaurants are located.
And finally, Section 5, the value of labor data, or basically why all these metrics actually matter to the business.
So we've covered the what and we've covered the how, but let's wrap things up with the strategic why. Like, why go through all this effort to separate out overtime, exclude corporate staff, and benchmark the 10th percentile? Well, as the source material points out, offering competitive wages and safe environments directly boost employee morale. And higher morale, it ultimately drives down those turnover rates. I think we all know the universal pain of restaurant turnover. Reducing it literally eliminates a massive administrative burden and the steep costs of constantly hiring and training new staff. Honestly, good labor data directly protects shareholder value.
So, as you go back and look at your own franchise or corporate reporting after this explainer, I want you to ask yourself a question. Are you truly capturing the health of your human engine using these precise, standardized calculations? Or is there a deeper, maybe slightly more complicated story hidden in the math that you've been missing? Getting this right isn't just about compliance, guys. It's a real game changer for optimizing the very heartbeat of your operations.